And it's new technology. This has never been done before. And what's happened now is that what seems to be, it's not science driving this at all. It's politics and agendas about doing these things. So here's just an example. So, you see people, and they stopped some of the vaccines in the UK. Might have been, people were having adverse reactions. They're going into anaphylactic shock. So now they say, okay, if you're allergic and you have allergic reactions, you shouldn't take it. And it might be a good idea, though, to have resuscitation equipment available just as a general rule when you administer these vaccines. Well, that's comforting. And, my concern, too, is the way that the modified RNA vaccines work. Those are Moderna and Pfizer, which seem to be at the leading edge of this. And they're distributing these things now. The vaccines are being delivered today all over the world. And we're talking, this is, usually there were vaccines and they took years, decades even to develop. And now this is done in 10 months. And they don't have final testing done. They don't even know what the dosage is that they're supposed to give people. A lot of them require 2 shots. And here's an example. This is from Australia. They were developing a vaccine and they stopped because the people that were getting the vaccine, they would then test them and they were testing positive for HIV. Now, I don't know what's going on there. Did these people get HIV? I kind of doubt that. But the antigens and antibodies that they were producing indicated that they had HIV or were positive for HIV. So Australia stopped this company's trials, just said we're done with them. But they're going on, and they said that the RNA vaccines, they need to be stored at 70 or 80 degrees below zero. So I thought, well, it's going to take them a while to manufacture all that. It doesn't seem to make any difference. They've commandeered air fleets. Empty passenger planes are flying these things all over the place on dry ice. My understanding is here in Ohio, tomorrow or Tuesday, they'll start administering these. And in a lot of countries, in the UK, some of the surveys show 44% of healthcare workers who are going to be the first ones don't want to take it. And yet they're pushing it forward like I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. Have you? So it's very, very concerning because we do not know how people are going to react with this. They don't even know how they're going to react to this vaccine, let alone how it might interact with everything, other medications that you might be on. And I did represent a pharmaceutical company in some cases on drug design and interactions and that type of thing. And I've been in the rooms. I've seen huge conference rooms, boxes stacked 3 deep, 6 high, all the way around the rim and all over the table with mainly adverse incident reports and other testing materials. And those were drugs that were tested for years. And sometimes it had been used in Europe for a while before they even were brought to the United States. So there's a lot to be concerned about these vaccines. But again, I would urge people to be truthful in what you say about the vaccines, because I don't think it does anything to your credibility if you just sort of throw everything against the wall. And if you're trying to make this the mark of the beast, I think you fail theologically, massively. No beast, no mark. Now, is this leading up to it? There are a lot of things leading up to it. Tracking on social media and all these things, all of that's part of the plan. I've said this, we already have social credit scores here in the United States. They just don't tell us. People are getting blocked and banned from all sorts of platforms. We know that we're probably not going to last forever on YouTube. So we're exploring other alternatives. I was setting up a Rumble account for videos this morning.
That's good, John, because we just lost all 3 platforms. I had to restart them all.
Oh, really?
Right in the middle of it.
Okay, so we just lost this. Okay. So I guess it was a breeze that knocked the internet out. So, and look, if you decide you want to take the vaccine, that's your choice, okay? Now, there are some ethical issues with some of the vaccines, not all of them that might use or have used in their research aborted fetal cells from these cell lines that have been around for a long time. And you can find ethical papers for Christians that are written about them, like the AstraZeneca one that says it's okay. You'll find others that it's not okay. You'll find others that say it's not okay, but they don't really accurately describe what's going on. So I'm very concerned about the misinformation that's coming from every direction on a lot of things. This is very bothering. But listen, this is why Jesus took the time, 4 times more than he did anything else in the Olivet Discourse. And he said, if you get into this end time period, be careful that no one deceives you. Now, no one means no one. In fact, one of the warnings is, for people will come saying, I am the Christ. You might even have someone do a rally and say, I'm the true mother of peace. And Christians, so-called Christians, will just go along with it because it's a big rally. It's troubling. So this is an article, some articles from Cloward-Piven and Times of Israel. This is one, U.S. will likely recommend that people with severe allergies avoid the Pfizer vaccine. And the testing seems to be slipshod. South Korea said they're not rushing with COVID vaccinations. They've been one of the best countries in managing this whole thing, it appears, but they're a very homogeneous society, and they're not pushing it. But here's this article from Cloward-Piven. We won't force the vaccine, but here's what we will do. Although Health Ministry Director Hezi Levy yesterday insisted to reporters that we won't force people to take a vaccine, Israel law doesn't allow for it. Innovation Officer Dr. Eyal Zimlikin listed measures that are being planned to maneuver the population into vaccinating as a way of regaining freedom of movement. The issue of how to motivate vaccine compliance has generated increasing interest, with commentators such as Mike Cernovich writing, government won't force you to take the vaccine. Amazon will. The airlines will, banks will. You won't be able to buy, sell, or trade without the vaccine. At least leave your home and do it. I don't know that you'll probably still be able to buy on Amazon and have things delivered to the house. Although the way this is going, maybe that's even questionable. As if underscoring Cernovich's word, Dr. Zimlichman told the committee, another thing that will apparently come into our lives, starting in small numbers already in January, which is soon, and that's the vaccine. If we're discussing how to create motivation for Israeli citizens to vaccinate, I agree. You can't force the population. It won't work. We can talk about it until tomorrow. It won't work. What is possible is to create motivation. Now, that seems to be a way of this is Orwellian doublespeak. And motivation is forcing people. It's just you don't call it forcing. So I guess then it's okay, right? Therefore, whoever is vaccinated will automatically receive green status. Therefore, you may vaccinate and receive green status to go freely in all the green zones. They'll open for you cultural events. They'll open to you the shopping malls, hotels, and restaurants. You may decide you're not vaccinating, and if you do want to enter into these areas, you'll need to submit to a PCR test, and therefore I believe people will understand by themselves that the vaccine will return them to regular life and they'll vaccinate themselves without our obligating them. But the idea we're putting out is actually something that's starting already now, and we're floating an initial pilot. We're testing and are ready to start with based on the PCR and based on antigen, assuming it will be authored by the health ministry. Assuming we're discussing a protracted period when part of the population will be vaccinated and part won't, for a year even, we see those areas growing in size, and those people who are vaccinated receive the pass to enter those green areas in the cities from the south to the north of the country. You want to go to Israel for a tour, see things? Get the jab. It's coming. I mean, people are going to be faced with that decision. Unless our politicians step in and say, oh, wait a minute. Now, what are the chances are that you think that that's going to happen? That the people that are locking everything down are going to say, well, we're going to back off a little bit and think about this. I would suggest to you, you have more chance of winning here big than you do of that happening. So, that is slide 28 of 92. This is almost becoming impossible. 92 is cutting it down. And I have a few things I want to go. So I think I'm going to go another half hour or so. Okay, so the election. Now, YouTube has indicated if you talk about the election and suggest that the election was unfair, unjust, improper, fraudulent, etc., your videos are going to be taken down. I don't know if it starts today or tomorrow. And if you continue to do it after another week or so, you'll get a strike against your channel. And if you continue to do it, there goes your channel. So the free speech, the non-free speech police are out and active and watching and listening. So listen, I'm going to report on what happened in some of the court decisions this week, and you can draw your own conclusions. So there was an appeal. Texas brought a lawsuit. I don't know if it was filed. I think it was not filed till after I did my update last week. The Texas claimed that they filed a lawsuit against 4 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and said that they failed to follow their own election rules and what their legislature has said. Therefore, the votes were improper, and that denied us equal protection under the law because we followed our rules. And under the U.S. Constitution, the legislature gets to set the manner for election of officials. So the case was filed by Texas. It was joined in by about 20 other states, not Ohio. The Attorney General of Ohio decided that he would say, well, I think filing the complaint's okay, but Texas is way off base in the relief that they want. So, you just need to make a note of that and remember that when somebody runs in the next election, if you don't like that. And it does appear, I voted and everything, and I kind of watched and Ohio seems to have it down pretty well. I got like an audit card and confirmation of my vote and that type of thing. It really seemed to work pretty well. And I can only assume that they're doing pretty much the same thing across the state. I was very impressed. And there was nobody really challenging Ohio, right? But these other states, the allegations are that, there were extra ballots found and counting, and it continued. And there are some very strange statistical anomalies. But the Supreme Court told this 4 states reply by 3 o'clock on Thursday. My view was, I know I posted something on my Facebook account, and I said, look, they're probably going to have a decision Friday or Saturday. Because they know that the Electoral College meets tomorrow, Monday, December 14th, and there's not a lot of time to do something to stop that process if that's what a court decides to do. And that's what happened. There was a decision Friday evening, and it said the petition to file a complaint in the Supreme Court was denied because Texas lacks standing. That's a legal term of art. You run into it in court a lot. Think of it this way. If the example I would use would be a divorce. Let's say your child gets married to somebody you can't stand. I've heard this has happened. I don't have children. I'm pretty sure it didn't happen in my case, so I'm speaking hypothetically, of course. Well, if you want your child to get divorced from that person, you don't get to file a divorce petition because you don't have standing. You're not an interested party. You're a concerned party. You care about what happens, but you don't have the legal standing to do that. And that's what the court said. Texas does not have the legal standing. I think that what Texas did was an incredibly creative legal argument. I thought it was fantastic. But I said early last week, like a lot of other legal people did, the kind ones, was that this is a Hail Mary. I don't think this is going to work. But Hail Marys happen. I think there were some that happened yesterday in college football. That happens in college football, seems to be more than anywhere else. But it could have happened, but it didn't, and the court turned it down. Now, there are reports circulating on the internet that the justices in their closed-door meeting were yelling and screaming at each other, and that Roberts was saying, to some of the junior associates, I'm going to tell you how to vote. And if we take this case, there will be riots in the street, and do you want to cause that? And the only other comment I heard from anyone was Clarence Thomas, who said, John, if we don't take the case, this is the end of democracy in the United States. Now, I think Clarence Thomas is a very wise man. He's been around a long time. And so the vote was 7-2, Thomas and Alito said they would look at the case, but they never said we thought that the case had merit. So it's over. That case is over. There are other challenges that are working their way through the courts. I don't know if they'll be successful. There's hope that some of the state legislatures will intervene and change the slate of electors because of irregularities in the election and not following the legislature's rules. But that would have to happen in 2 or 3 states, and I don't know if that's going to happen. And, I'm sort of like, I'll believe it when I see it. So, and I see a lot of talks, too, about Texas. Republican Chairman Colonel West, Allen West, has said, we're going to secede from the Union. And some other states are talking about it. So listen, it is a turmoil. We haven't seen anything like this since 1860. Thank the Lord for that. So 160 years ago. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to make any predictions. I'll report on it. I think there are things that need to be looked at. Usually the courts are reluctant to take these cases. Judges live in neighborhoods, and I think some of them are afraid. I'll be honest with you. The time to fight these is when the rules were being made, and that there was not a very good job done at that. And there were people, Todd Timmerman and some other people wrote books about it that, listen, with this mail-in balloting thing, it's just a recipe for fraud. How'd that work out? And so the only way to do this. So now the interesting thing about this, in the Dallas Morning News, it's reported that there were 126 House Republican congressmen, women in the House of Representatives. that signed on to the brief of Texas. There were amicus briefs filed by the Pennsylvania legislators, some legislators, I think some in Arizona, and 126 in the House of Representatives. So the case went away. So that should end it, right? One Democrat, New Jersey Rep. Bill Pascrell, wrote Speaker Nancy Pelosi asking her not to allow those lawmakers to be sworn in for another term next month over their blatant disregard for the Constitution. This man is a fool. No, he's not. He's worse than that. He is evil. The left will always accuse you. It's sort of like one of the guiding principles of life, okay? The left will always accuse you of doing what they're actually doing. Congressman Swalwell, or whatever his name is, who had an affair with a Chinese spy, and then accused the president of messing around with Russia when he was literally messing around with China, a Chinese spy. Senator Dianne Feinstein, for 20 years, her chief of staff was a Chinese spy. Debbie Wasserman Schultz had another, I forget where that person came from, that was Pakistan maybe. They're equal opportunity violators of civil discourse and thought. This is very, very bad, in my opinion. I don't know how it cleans up. So Pascrell said, you signed on to this brief, you should never sit in Congress again. By the way, there are lawyers organizing and making lists of every lawyer who participated in the brief or the Trump administration, and they're going to be going to state bar associations to get these lawyers sanctioned or disbarred or suspended from the practice of law. This is not over by a long shot, folks. Pelosi didn't directly respond to that suggestion, but she did agree with the sentiments. Pelosi said, quote, "The 126 Republican members that signed onto this lawsuit brought dishonor to the House." Now, it used to be a rule of, another unalterable rule of life is that if Nancy Pelosi's lips were moving, she's lying. Okay? Now she's wearing a mask and you can't tell. So if there's a sound emanating from her, she's lying. I saw an interview with her. It was like, you remember the Charlie Brown cartoons where the adults were all like, wah, 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 da, 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 da. It sounds like this everywhere. Are you telling people to repeat stuff all the time now? It's like we're all hard of hearing. And like, what did you say? I just wanted my French fries. And then they're over there. Okay, so, because we can't touch you or anything. It's just, so the 126 Republicans that signed onto this lawsuit brought dishonor to the House. This is Nancy Pelosi. I know you think that I'm reading from the Babylon Bee or the Onion, but this is real life stuff here. This is the Dallas Morning News. Instead of upholding their oath to support and defend the Constitution and undermine public trust in our sacred democratic institutions, the court has rightly dismissed out of hand the extreme, unlawful, and undemocratic GOP lawsuit to overturn the will of millions of American voters. So her remedy is to overturn the will of millions of American voters as to who they decided to have them represent them in Congress. Honorable rule of life. If there's sound emanating from her, don't believe it. And they always accuse you of doing what they are actually doing. This is egregious. So and I've heard the Republicans may say, we're not going to accept the election results when they are counted in Congress in early January. Now would be time to lay in some popcorn if you want to sit and watch this, because it's going to be a big show. I don't know what's going to happen. This is from The Economist, new edition. 6 months after mass protests, what is the future of BLM? Their conclusion? So their people kind of won, right? So they're going to back off. No, they're going to come back stronger than ever. This is The Economist saying this. This is what they're reporting. Social media, they're putting some free speech rules in the UK. Facebook came out and said, we welcome the regulation. Good grief. It's just, I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's unbelievable. Jesus said there'd be deception and lawlessness in the last days. Do we have it? Oh, here's another example. This will be great. You remember the couple in Missouri and they lived in a nice neighborhood and people trespassed on their property and they went out with some guns because it was sort of a moving, peaceful demonstration. So what happened was they were charged with a crime by Kim Gardner, who's the Soros-funded, and this is documented proof. You can find videos on CNN where they say she was funded by Soros in large part because she's tearing down the system. So what she did was there were charges brought for trespass. She dropped all those charges. She charged the McCloskeys with felony endangerment, or felony or misdemeanor endangerment, and also said that tampering with evidence. Because when the police raided their house to get the gun as evidence, the gun that the wife had held was torn apart. So they were charged with tampering with evidence, even though the prosecutor then told the police to put the gun back together because you can't bring a charge if it's not in a working order. On a liberal rule of life, they will always accuse you of doing what they are doing. Now, the judge ruled this week, though, the prosecutor went out and said, help me fight this case. And the judge said, you're disqualified from participating in this case. And in fact, every single attorney in the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office is also disqualified because you're all acting improperly and against the rules of ethical conduct for lawyers. Praise the Lord for this judge. But it gets worse and worse. This is a guy, his name is George Gascon, who is the new LA County District Attorney. One of the things that he did when he came in, he said, I'm eliminating bail for most crimes. He is a radical leftist. This is the LA Times. This is not like a conservative newspaper. They told what happened because you know where he worked before he's come to Los Angeles to do he's not taking an oath of office. He's taking an oath of destruction of society. He used to work, he was up in San Francisco. How's San Francisco going? So he said he embarked Monday on a plan to reimagine, reimagine, criminal prosecute up the John Lennon song, prosecutions in Los Angeles County, announcing sweeping policy changes he'll be making as district attorney that includes an end to cash bail, a ban on prosecutors seeking enhanced prison sentences, and showing leniency to many low-level offenders. The dramatic reversals, this is the LA Times article, the dramatic reversals of deeply ingrained traditional law enforcement strategies in the nation's largest district attorney's office. Get that? The biggest one. Also will include a review of thousands of old cases to determine whether lighter sentences or prisoner releases should be sought, Gascon said in a speech during his swearing-in ceremony. Quote, I recognize for many this is a new path, whether you are a protester a police officer, or a prosecutor, I ask you to walk with me. I ask you to join me on this journey. We can break the multi-generational cycles of violence, trauma, and arrest and recidivism that has led America to incarcerate more people than any other nations. Now, they did a study years ago in Los Angeles. And you know what the study concluded? They couldn't figure out what happened. More felons were in prison and the crime rate fell. This really troubled the academics. How could this happen? We put people in prison and the crime rate falls. If vaccines cause brain damage, what are these people going to be like? Seriously. It's really hard not, well. So he had done it up in, and you can get the article from the LA Times from last Monday or Tuesday. Of course, this would not, it says, while Gascon's victory over Lacey was widely viewed as a repudiation by voters of more traditional tough-on-crime policies, his focus on reducing incarceration rates could meet resistance at a time when violent crime is surging in Los Angeles. It's surging all over the country. And what do? Well, we let them out on bail. Because, we put them in on bail that labels them, and they're more likely to commit crime when they get out. So we have to let them out on cash bail. How's this work? This is a tweet from a San Francisco police department from the Tenderloin district. It's near sort of west of Union Square, if you've ever been to San Francisco, below Nob Hill. And it's not, it can be, I don't know, years, back in the 80s when you went there, it was a pretty rough area to go walk through or drive through at night. There were entrepreneurs of the evening that were selling their wares themselves on the street. It was pretty blatant. This is 30 years ago. So here's the update from the San Francisco Police Department Tenderloin. Update. They've arrested a guy. This same suspect continues to steal vehicles. Tonight he is back in custody for his 14th motor vehicle theft arrest after our officers spotted him riding a motorcycle in McAllister and Leavenworth. The motorcycle had a stolen license plate and all the VIN numbers have been released. In the last year, he's been arrested for motor vehicle theft, arrested 14 times. How many do you think he's committed? 10 times that amount? Daily? And so what does Garcon's policies that he had put in place in San Francisco were? He's out, get him out on bail. Heather McDonald at the New York Post writes about this, and she's just appalled. Things that are going to be not bail, trespass. Los Angeles streets and all but its wealthiest neighborhoods are already overrun by squalid encampments. Business owners who have managed to survive the lockdown regularly have to sweep vagrants off their property in the morning, along with feces and drug paraphernalia. Here's another one that won't be charged or bail, or you will get out on bail immediately, no cash. Driving without a license or driving with a suspended license. I had to go down to the office the other day, Wednesday. I posted a picture on my Facebook page. When I left on Front Street in downtown Columbus, from Front Street to I-70 is maybe 3/4 of a mile to a mile. I saw a bus and a car, not a single person, at right after lunchtime on Wednesday in the middle of the week on a nice sunny day. There's nobody there. It's like a zombie apocalypse down there. On my way down, between where I get on at the Delaware exit on 71 and 270, I had 4 cars pass me going at least 120 miles an hour. When I was driving home, I decided to pass a truck. I had to go, well, I shouldn't say what I did. I went over the speed limit. that all the trucks were doing 80 miles an hour on 70. It's insane. So public intoxication and loitering to commit prostitution. And the Los Angeles City Council recently cut $150 million from the LAPD budget, despite the largest spike in homicides in the city in 10 years and a 32% increase in shootings. Gascon asked his doubters to close their eyes and imagine an ideal safe neighborhood with parks, playgrounds, and kids playing. Heather concludes, dream on. Now here's something we haven't heard about for a while. I've always wondered the logistics of this. Here is a migrant caravan forming, and the kids were showing up. It's 1,100 to 1,200 miles across Mexico from the farthest southern border of Mexico. So people have to go days to get to the border, and then they get from there to the U.S. border, 1,100 to 1,500 miles away. And they don't even have a change of pair of socks or food or anything. Now, how are they doing that? How do kids get 1,500 miles without a little bit of assistance? I remember my brother and cousin and I in Dayton, Ohio, once we actually went someplace to look at some things, and we didn't know we're like 7 years old. We don't know how far it is. We ended up walking like 12 miles. I thought I was going to die. I really did. We're climbing over fences to take shortcuts and all this stuff. And my poor little 5-year-old brother, he's like, what are you guys doing to me? I don't want to go home. How do they do this? They have help. They're collapsing the structures of society. It's unbelievable. Okay, so we're going to rocket through this. Man, oh man. Slide 38. Turkey. Okay, so Turkey's having a bit of an issue. Iran is upset with them because Erdogan went to Azerbaijan, and when he went to Azerbaijan, he criticized Russia and Iran, and he quoted some poem, and so front page of the New York Times and big whole page article inside, all the columns inside on page 2 or 3 are like, hey, what are you doing, Erdogan? You shouldn't be doing this. You don't understand history and all this stuff. And now Erdogan says, well, it's not really fair that you're using offensive language against me. Now, Turkey's having a lot of problems. They're having a lot of economic problems. And if you watch Turkey, which I do, I've watched it for years, Erdogan, he took over these churches, turned them into mosques. He was doing this. He's been messing around in the Eastern Med. More about that in just a moment. But they're having financial trouble. They're going to get hit with sanctions. Europe's mad at them. The United States is mad at them. Now they're trying to play nice with Israel. They're trying to back off of that. I'll show you a very elaborate scheme that they have. And Erdogan, rather than going around changing mosques and all of this stuff, he has a pretty strong rival who's the mayor of Istanbul right now. So what Erdogan is going around, he's going around opening public works projects. The ring road in this place and the water treatment plant, because he's showing how much he cares and he's a man of the people, and it's all a charade. He's to the point now where I think he's going to be attending opening of the new drinking fountain at outside the men's room at the new Istanbul airport and that type of thing. I'm serious. It's completely changed from all of his forays, messing around in Libya, messing around in Syria. Now for public consumption, it's all this public stuff. We attended the opening of the new water treatment plant in this city or that city. Go look at his Twitter feed. That's all he's doing right now. It's pretty amazing. So here's an article. This is a paper that you can find it at dayan.org, DAYAN.org. Title of it is Israel. This is written by a pro-Erdogan government sycophant. And so this is what he says. Israel is Turkey's neighbor across the sea. Delimitation of the maritime jurisdiction areas between Turkey and Israel. And they go into this very elaborate article, great graphics to help you understand this thing in the Eastern Med, the Turkey-Libya thing there on the left. Israel, it says, well, we need to have an Israel-Turkey one, because that will actually give Israel more territory, because Israel's got a problem with Lebanon, so we have a solution for this. And Turkey, we care so much about our friends in Israel that we want to help them get more territory in the Mediterranean. And we want to help them put the gas pipeline in place. Don't go through Greece and Cyprus. And so this is like a 10-page paper. The maps, I love maps, as you know. And this one's great. It looks at the Aphrodite field. They go through very detailed drawings, and then they even have look at the extra territory that Israel would get if they would just recognize how much I, Erdogan, love Israel and want to help Israel to succeed and prosper. If they just would realize that, they would have more territory. And they have these engineering schematics. It's an amazing article, I think. And so this, in Erdogan's world, this here and this up here and over there is opposite to each other. So that's not Libya and Turkey, kind of, but I'm not sure that Israel, I don't know if that really flies with the opposite thing. And so, but they have drawings. It's the line connecting the coast of Israel and Turkey, which face one another. I think if you kind of turn and there's a guy who wrote this paper. It's sort of comic relief. So that's Erdogan. He's at war a little bit with Macron. And Macron, everybody's going, what happened to Macron? He's put in the separatism law. He's shutting down homeschooling for Islamists and Christians now. And he's far right wing. What happened? Well, he's trying to get elected. He's tacking to the right. He probably should be tested for whiplash, because he's really tested. Separatism. Here's an article that, the Figaro, separatism. He's revising his ambitions. And he's trying to do the separatism thing, but he's really calling it equality. This is from Liberation. It's a pretty left-wing magazine. They don't like it. Here's one from another magazine, The Madmen of the Republic. Because it's all the people. It's not just Macron, it's the whole stinking parliament that did this to us. Even the Wall Street Journal noticed this the other day. Macron seeks an enlightened Islam. And some people got to say, is that a joke? At the same time, he had a meeting with al-Sisi of Egypt this week, talking about Egypt and France are fighting together on several fronts. And they actually have a nice little map. I love these maps that they do. There's a guy that he's from Azerbaijan. It's called the Caspian Report. He does these high overviews, sort of three-dimensional maps and moving, and I cannot figure out I've written to him, I cannot figure out what software program he uses. So if somebody looks at this Caspian Report and can figure out, please let me know, because I would love to have this. But anyway, so look at these things. Libya, you have the East Med field, gas field, or economic zone that Erdogan put together with Libya. Now you have problems in the what do they call that? The Sinai Peninsula. And then, of course, we're supporting Egypt with this thing over the dam down in Ethiopia that's going to cut off their water. Even though Egypt does have another dam that they could drain a little bit out. I don't know anybody ever thinks about that. So this week, this is going to take about a little bit of time. I have so much. So in Qatar, or in Bahrain this week, there was the Manama dialogues. You remember Jared Kushner went there, I think it was about a year ago, and he was pushing the peace plan and the economic development that was going to come from what we do with regard to our plan for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And that was a precursor to all these normalization talks that Kushner has led and continues to lead. He was over there this week. So here's Bahrain. They have the Manama dialogues. They're pushing to get some kind of a rapprochement between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, and Bahrain have been at odds with Qatar for 3 years. They've sanctions, blockades, all these things. And so now they're trying to get Qatar back. And Qatar has they're Sunni, they're very big supporters. They will deny it, but they're pretty big supporters of Muslim Brotherhood things. They're very close to Turkey. But we have a base there. So the U.S. uses that to monitor things in the Persian Gulf. Qatar shares this gas field with Iran, the Pars gas field. Very wealthy thing. The average Qatar person gets payments from the government exceeding $1 million a year. I mean, that's a minimum. And there's only about 300,000, I don't know, Qatarites, I don't know, what do you call them? People that live in Qatar, that's what you call them. And they get a lot of money, and so they're very wealthy. They outsource about everything that they need to do. So in Bahrain this week, there was this Manama dialogue. Great graphics, Dr. John Chipman. Here's what he has to say. I think there's audio. Okay, maybe I should turn this one down. But anyway, look, he says they've got all kinds of problems. We've got COVID, things are stalled, people are at odds with each other. Essentially what he's saying is, he's our guest updater this week. There's a lot of tension in the world, especially in the Middle East. So there were a number of speeches. The final concluding plenary session had the foreign minister from Bahrain and Prince Turk Al Faisal, who used to be the ambassador to the U.S., and who's very opinionated. He says, listen, I'm talking just for myself, okay? So we know there were a few weeks ago, I played the clip of another Saudi guy who had been involved. He's older, and he said, the Palestinians, they've been a pain. They don't cooperate. We're tired of sending them money. We'll send money directly to the people, but the Palestinian leadership we're done with. So now so we know that there's all this. Is there going to be a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia? And there's people pushing for it, and then there's people that are opposing it. And so Faisal would be in the King Salman camp, which says this is traditional thing. We want the Arab Peace Initiative to be put in place. That was adopted in Lebanon back in 2002, reaffirmed in 2007 and 2013. I'm going to play a few minutes of Faisal because I think you need to listen to what he says. So here we go. Here's Prince Turk Al Faisal, former ambassador to the United States. Here's what he says. And I got to get to the place where he is actually talking. What he did was he condemned Israel as a colonial power. Here we go.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Minister Zayani, Dr. Shipman, ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful to His Majesty King Hamad al-Khalifa.
By the way, while he's saying this, Foreign Minister Ashkenazi is sitting on the phone getting ready to speak from Israel. Well, here we go. Let's back this up. Okay, here we go.
Salman al-Khalifa, Ala Hamad al-Khalifa, for inviting me to attend the 16th Regional Summit of the Manama Dialogue. My thanks go to the International Institute for Strategic Studies as well. I am here in my personal capacity, and the words I speak express my opinions. The Israeli governments portray themselves as peace-loving upholders of high moral principles. And yet, they have claimed to be the protectors of human rights. And yet, they proclaim that they are the only democratic country in the Middle East. And yet, they humbly depict themselves as a small, existentially threatened country surrounded by bloodthirsty killers who want to eradicate her from existence. And yet, they declared war on Hamas as a terrorist organization. And yet, they profess that they want to be friends with Saudi Arabia. And yet, all Israeli governments are the last of the Western colonizing powers of the Middle East. From the time of the Balfour Declaration, they have forcibly evicted the inhabitants of Palestine after the 1948 war, as attested to by Israeli historians. They burned the villages of the Palestinians to the ground. They repeated that calumny after the 1967 war, when more of the inhabitants of what remained after the 1948 war were equally dispossessed of their lands. Despite several UN Security Council resolutions rejecting the acquisition of territory by force of arms, all Israeli governments paid no heed to them. They continued to colonize more territory of the lands they occupied in 1967 against the Geneva Conventions that prohibit the change of the status of occupied territories. While doing that, they built a wall, the apartheid wall, to prevent the inhabitants of the lands they colonized from returning to their stolen properties. The International Court of Justice issued a ruling that the wall is illegal. They ignored that ruling. And yet, Israeli governments have arrested thousands of the inhabitants of the lands they are colonizing and incarcerated them in concentration camps under the flimsiest of security accusations, young and old, women and men, who are rotting there without recourse to justice. They are demolishing homes as they wish, and they assassinate whomever they want to. And yet, the Israeli Knesset passed a law that defines the citizenship of Israel as exclusively Jewish, denying the non-Jewish inhabitants of Israel of equal rights under the law. What kind of democracy is that? And yet, Israel is the most powerful military between the Atlantic and the Urals. Its might is displayed in its ability to bomb adversaries in Syria willy-nilly, without them daring to raise a finger, as it were, in defense. Not to mention its previous military exploits in...
Well, you get the point. In case I need to translate willy-nilly there, that's a diplomatic term that means whenever you want to. And yet, so Gabe Ashkenazi, the foreign minister of Israel, only really been the foreign minister for 7 months, he's sitting there listening to this. He was a participant by video link. The Jerusalem Post noted that was pretty noteworthy, the fact that he was on the same panel as a Saudi prince, even more so, because Prince Turk was to sit on a panel with him, and the topic was new security partnerships in the Middle East. Ashkenazi and his staff were lulled into a sense of security that turned out to be false. So he sits there and listens to that, and he has this to say when he starts. This guy's a diplomat, okay? Here he goes.
At the beginning of my remark, I would like to express my regret on the comments of the Saudi representative, the foreign minister. I don't believe that they reflect the spirit and the changes taking place in the Middle East. And I will refer to them during the rest of my comment. This year dialogue is a milestone. We are about...
Well, you get the point. I regret what he said. So this is what was issued in 2002, the Arab Peace Initiative. And part of it is Faisal comes from the old guard in Saudi Arabia. We have King Salman in the old guard represented by Faisal. We have the new guard represented by King Salman and his good friend. They do have a very close relationship, it appears, Jared Kushner. And so Faisal was sort of like venting because Kushner gave an interview about a year ago where he talked about the Saudi-backed Arab Peace Initiative from 2002. And they invited 20 or 22 countries, including the PLO Yasser Arafat, to this conference in Beirut. And Israel said, look, Arafat, if you leave, you're never coming back. So Arafat didn't go. Only about 10 countries showed up. And they came out with this. And again, it's been reaffirmed by the Arab League a couple times. So 57 Arab and Muslim countries. And it's sort of, it was the three no's. No this, no this, no, N-O, no, no. We won't agree to any of this. But if you do these, you know, if you don't violate our no's, then we'll make peace with Israel. So this has been knocking around for 20 years. And here's what Kushner said about that peace agreement a year ago.
If you think about it, for the Middle East, the unifying feature of a lot of the Arab world over the last 70 years is the hatred of Israel. And they've used that often to deflect from a lot of their own shortcomings internally. And so Israel is not the cause of the problems throughout a lot of this region, throughout a lot of these places. The problem is bad governance. The problem is lack of opportunity for people and lack of investment in the right way. So again, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out what is a framework for moving forward. You mentioned the Arab Peace Initiative. I think that was a very, very noble effort when it was done in 2002. The Arab Peace Initiative says that there's no military solution to this conflict, which I think is a very important recognition. It has to be a negotiated solution. The parties have tried negotiating for a lot of years. It hasn't worked.
So in other words, Faisal's kind of ticked off at Jared. That's part of, because Jared's doing things his own way. And Faisal, you know, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman gave tacit approval to the Abraham Accords. But some reports say that his father, Saudi King Salman, was not informed in advance. This is to some extent a reflection of a divide in the Saudi royal court when it comes to Israel that breaks down mostly on generational lines. MBS sees relations with Israel as a net positive for the kingdom, while the king feels strongly committed to the traditional Arab stance towards the Palestinians. Now listen, I do think you need to look at this Arab Peace Accords in the context of Psalm 83, which talks about these bordering countries, of which there are 10, entering into alliance with Israel. And my concern is, the way I read that is, in the background, they're conniving. So MBS may agree to this, but there's the Faisals in the background who, they really do not like Israel. And that has not changed. So there's a surface agreement, but there's conniving in the background. Very interesting thing. Dor Gold then spoke. Now, Dor Gold wrote a book, essentially, to paraphrase it, calling the Saudi regime a bunch of oppressive, bloodthirsty killers. And he was at the conference, and he got to ask a question, and then Faisal responded.
Shifts in thinking about how we look at the Middle East, given the emotions that our nations have gone through, are very difficult. I'm addressing my comments chiefly to His Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal, because I believe he comes from a country that has the capability of leading the region in a very positive direction. But we have to decide, do we want to be caught up in the accusations of the past, many of which are false, or do we want to present the young generation in the Middle East with a positive vision and really give leadership for a better future? I prefer the latter, and I know my national leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, prefers the latter. I was going to ask a very simple question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you, Prince Turki Al Faisal, do you think we have something to learn from each other? Because we're at a strategic dialogue. not an ideological dialogue. Do you think we have something to learn from each other with respect to the challenge Israel has faced from the north, from Hezbollah since the early 1980s, and the challenge you face from the south, from the Houthi militants? I'd like to hear your view.
I think Mr. Dory Gold should be the last one to talk about having previous beliefs and positions to take care of. I'm reminded of his book, Hatred's Kingdom, about Saudi Arabia. I don't know if he still holds those views or not, but I remember watching him on television, denigrating the kingdom and using the most vile descriptions about how the kingdom is, how it is tortures people, how it is a dark country, etc., etc., etc. But
and yet,
this is why there is good opportunity to know what each is coming from. As far as the north and south, north of Israel and south of Saudi Arabia, and as Minister Zayani said, both those north of Israel and south of Saudi Arabia carry the banner of Free Palestine. And so, if you resolve that issue, you will strip away from all of these inimical and heinous groups, whether official or non-official, that banner. And it will really go a long way to mitigating the incentive to join these terrorist groups by the young, as His Excellency mentioned, people without shelter, without food, without education, etc., etc. On reflect.
so, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This was a book that came out this week. Well, it came out about a month ago. A Promised Land, 868 pages, which is, I hear it's the first of 3 volumes of Barack Obama opining and pontificating on his favorite subject, Barack Obama. In there, you can find an article. I don't have time to go through it today. He talks in chapter 25 about Israel. I'll talk more about it in the future. This man, you always say, well, give somebody a lie detector test. You can't give him a lie detector test. He would flatline the thing. He's unbelievable. He is the most self-aware human being I've ever seen on the public stage. And there are probably a dozen points where he talks about the history of Israel and the formation of Israel that he just gets dead wrong. So everything he said in his 2009 speech, June 4th, 2009, at Al-Azhar University, go look it up, torture yourself. He was wrong on every point there. He's still wrong. And all his people seem to be getting jobs in the Biden administration. It's like, I called it last week, I probably did a Norm Crosby malaprop. I called it the O'Biden administration. I think it's probably true. I mistakenly swerved into the truth. So, anyway, there were other things. Bolton spoke at a conference on Iran. Now we have a peace agreement normalization with Morocco. Hezbollah is talking about this, and they're saying these Saudis, but this young guy, he loves Israel, he's loved Israel all along. That's the Hezbollah mouthpiece in Lebanon, talking about it. Kushner's getting the Morocco thing. Here's an article from this morning's Haaretz saying to normalize ties with Israel, Saudi Crown Prince must placate his father and Biden. And so this is a lot of intrigue and what's going to happen. And I guarantee you, I'm not making a prediction, but if the Biden administration comes into power, on January 20th. I expect Saudi to normalize with Israel very shortly thereafter, because they have the Iranian problem. And this was in Al-Quds, well, it was in the London Arabic newspaper, how Israel's just kind of controlling everything now. That's what they're seeing. And Haaretz is speculating that Kushner went to Qatar because he needs some money when he gets out. I don't know if he needs money. I don't know. Qatar did help him out financially with participating in that building at 666 Fifth Avenue, at least his company's building in New York. Most expensive office price ever paid for an office building. I also see that Jared and Ivanka bought a $30 million empty lot down around Miami Beach, on a private island down there, to build a home for when they leave. So anyway, so listen, there's so much going on right now. I think I'm going to hold off on the rest. Listen, we are right in the middle of Hanukkah. So I'm going to do first hour in 2 weeks. I did a little bit of a talk on Hanukkah in history and prophecy many years ago. I think I'm going to rework that and do that, because there's some update things that I want to bring into it. What is the significance of Hanukkah? What happened historically? And does it have anything to do with Bible prophecy? I think the answer to the last question is yes. And if you want to know that, watch in 2 weeks, first hour, and I will talk about that. In the meantime, just like they used to say on that one cop show, be careful out there. There's a lot of things going on, and I think you need to be very cautious with how you proceed. I don't know what's going to happen. Believe me, if I knew, I would tell you. I don't know what's going to happen in the election challenges. I just do not know. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of turmoil and even violence on the streets of the United States. I can tell you there's turmoil and violence on the street of, now Obama, he would have got that fly like that. I'm not Obama, apparently. Anyway, there's a lot going on, and you need to stay in the Word. Listen, for all the stuff that's going on, in the end, this really works out really well. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, if you believe that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, the Son of God, lived a perfect life, died on a cross in place of us for our sins, buried, rose again on the third day, ascended to heaven, and he's returning. If you believe the gospel, that Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone is the hope for your salvation, it works out really well. If you don't go there. Now is the time of salvation. Now is the accepted time. Don't delay. Don't delay. And focus on Jesus. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. We pray that you will bless us this week. And Lord, we pray that the leaders of our country, the leaders of other countries, will stand up for what is right and true and just. Give them wisdom, give them strength, give them power to act rightly and righteously. And help us to remember to keep them in prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.